Hey, look, before we get into this reaction, I just want to send my hopes and prayers out to Tonga. I'm not sure if everyone knows. I'm sure you will by now. But a volcano erupted just off the coast of Tonga, right next to Tonga. Was heard over 5,000 miles away. The explosion. Apparently, you know, tidal waves have hit Tonga. People have lost their homes. I'm not too sure how many people, if anyone's lost their lives yet, but I'm pretty sure some people have, bro. So, yo, my hearts go out to everyone over there. Condolences to everyone affected by the tragic events happening over in Tonga at the moment. And kia kaha, bro. Kia kaha. New Zealand's got you. So I have seen that our Prime Minister is sending relief teams over there, things like that, bro. Australia's also there as well. I just hope that the rest of the world can get together and help you guys out too, bro. But yo, hearts go out to you guys. Love, condolences, and hey, I wish everybody the best over there, man. All right, much love.
How you get like that? How the whole team go flex like? How the whole time they get jet like? How them think go flex like?
How you get like that? How the whole team go flex like that? How you fly a jet like that? How you be on the road when the feds like that? And the feds go hard, so we gotta hit the gas when we see them cars. Now we can't go back, won't see them bars. Locked in the jam, now we them stars.
Hey yo, what up, dude squad? Hey man, welcome back to HOODROK Entertainment, bro. The realest, illest, dopest, and most active reaction channel on YouTube. You already know what up, bro. Hit that notification bell, tap that like button, subscribe. You read the title, yo. We're touching down in the US again. We're gonna carry on off that. You know, I did a reaction this morning to Coach the Ghost from New York, and I thought, yo, why not just stay in the States for the time being, bro? And after this, bro, I'm gonna react to O-Block versus Tuckerville. Now, I've already seen this one here, bro. I've seen the O-Block versus Tuckerville one as well, bro. But this one's been getting dropped in the. I've watched all of these, bro. And this dude here, bro, who makes these videos, he knows what he's talking about, bro. You know what I mean? He knows what he's talking about. You know what I mean? So yeah, we're gonna get into this, bro. Run the numbers up on this video, yo. Run the numbers up on this video. And don't forget, bro, I go live at least 3 times every day. I'm dropping 6 or 7 videos, reaction videos a day. I'm active as hell. And you know how I get down on this side, bro. I'm blazing. I'm blazing. This is a 22-minute video, so the reaction's probably going to be about 30 minutes, bro. Let's get into this, man. Let's see what's up. Like I said, I've already seen this video. But, it's always good to recap on stuff, bro, because I watched this video a minute ago, you know what I mean? I barely remember it after all the videos that I've watched of this dude. So, yo, let's do this.
Get into this video, gang. I have just started my own label, and it's about to be the new Death Row. So make sure you hit that link in the description and go and subscribe to Trap Law Records with notifications on. New video unlocked at 10,000 subs. Let's get it, gang. On with the video.
Most of the shootings happen here in O-Block. Once low-income family apartment housing and the one-time home to a tiny tot called Michelle Obama, it is now ground zero in Chicago's gang wars.
In the 50s and 60s, Chicago's industries were booming, with it being a major manufacturing and processing hub for things like meatpacking, steel production, and glass making. All of these industries provided great employment opportunities, and in the 50s and 60s, there was a huge number of African-American families moving to Chicago as part of the Great Migration out of the South, with many moving into the Hyde Park and Kenwood areas of Englewood in Chicago's South Side, close to where the steel and meatpacking industries were providing the most opportunities. But unfortunately, over the decades that followed, industries began to decline in Chicago, with many of the communities those industries supported falling into unemployment and poverty.
Many of the industries that had anchored the neighborhood were in a fight for their lives. Manufacturing moved overseas. Environmental regulations grew. Markets shrank. Businesses disappeared, so did jobs. Without work, many people were forced to leave. Neighborhoods that had been stable for...
But the ones that stayed were forced to hustle. If you're missing that bit out. But the ones that stayed were forced to hustle because there was no work. You know what I mean? Not everybody lived town, bruh.
Generations began to see rental properties, absentee landlords, and abandoned homes.
Meanwhile, this being the 60s, you might be able to imagine how local attitudes towards the newly settled African-American families at the time may have been. Not so good. And it was during these decades that the African-American community in Chicago began to be subjected to numerous efforts by the state to make it harder for them to settle in the area. This included restrictive covenants, blocking the sale or renting of property to black tenants, and redlining whereby banks would refuse to lend on properties in areas where black families were located. With local tensions apparently boiling over when the city announced plans to expand social housing into the suburbs, adding smaller low-rise duplexes alongside existing high-rise tenements such as the notorious Cabrini Green housing projects. So with all of this going on at the time, it's safe to say that no one was really looking out for the best interests of the black community in Chicago. And so as young black men in the area began to be bullied, eventually getting tired of the abuse, they would band together and form a club to fight back against those who had been bullying them. Over time, these...
Isn't that a common story the world over? Now, the gang that I come from, bro, that's exactly how we were formed, bro. But we were formed in a juvenile detention center where youth were taken from families that they believed couldn't look after their kids. And what ended up happening was the mistreatment of these kids, and the youth ended up forming a gang, which is now the biggest gang in New Zealand. You know what I mean? I bet they wish they treated us better.
Street gangs evolved to be more organized, with one borrowing from religious mythology and naming themselves the Disciples. But soon after deciding that they wanted something a little bit more menacing, thus upgrading themselves to the Devil's Disciples, not to be confused with the biker gang of the same name. So in the years that followed, the Devil's Disciples fought with other gangs in the Englewood area, such as the racist white gang known as the Uptown Rebels, there was the Blackstone Rangers, another set known as the Egyptian Cobras, or later the Mickey Cobras, once again not to be confused with the Egyptian Cobras motorcycle gang. Anyway, one of the founding members of the Disciples crew was a man named David Barksdale, a teenage tough guy who apparently only aged 14 commanded leadership of this crew. David Barksdale was famously
at 14, bro.
King David, who some keen-eyed drillologists might remember that this is actually where current poppin' O-Block rapper King Von supposedly gets his name, as it seems for the past few years he's been spreading the rumor that he was the grandson of Disciples founder David Barksdale, King David. Anywho, if that's true, which it probably isn't, King Von's grandson set out to expand his Disciples, planning to do this by bringing together other smaller neighborhood gangs to bang together under the Disciples banner. And so in the 60s, Barksdale established a base at 63rd and Normal. Yes, King Von, 63rd. And from blocks that would later go on to be legendary in Chicago drill music folklore.
It's just funny as hell. Yes, King Von, 63rd. Went up on 63rd. You know what I mean?
King David set out
it's too funny, bro.
expanding the territory of the Disciples. But it wouldn't take him long to find some ops in the form of the Supreme Gangsters. The story of the crew, who would later go on to be the GDs or Gangster Disciples, starts in 1964 when a group of young men all met in the home of a man named Larry Hoover. And yes, that's Big Larry Hoover, who you might remember from Rick Ross's BMF song. Apparently one night
now, bro, you gotta remember. Yeah, you gotta remember, bro. This is what's good about these types of videos, is that you don't just learn about the gang, you learn about the roots. This dude goes right back to the roots, bro. This dude goes right back to the foundings, you know what I mean? That's why I like this dude's videos, bro. He covers everything, you know what I mean?
One night, Hoover and his boys were looking out the window at the gangsters and pimps on the street, and realizing that the house that they were sitting in was right on the border of Rangers and Disciple territory, they decided that they wanted to start their own crew and take over the block. So Larry Hoover and his boys started their own street crew called the Supreme Gangsters. They begun to beef with the local Blackstone Rangers and Egyptian Cobras, but initially had no beef with David Barksdale's Disciples, and generally just being more focused on getting money than beefing over turf. However, once King David begun to get other gangs to unite under his Disciples banner, he begun to refer to his conglomerate of gangs as the Black Disciple Nation. And this group eventually got so strong and powerful it attracted pushback, as the Black Peastone Rangers emerged out of the Black Stone Rangers of before, who begun to war for dominance with the Black Disciple Nation. Nation. So with the Black P. Stone Nation applying pressure to the currently still independent Supreme Gangsters, they decided that they needed an alliance too. So the Supreme Gangsters did exactly what the Black Disciple Nation had done, building alliances with any other street crews that also hated the P. Stones but didn't want to be in the Black Disciple Nation. So anyone who joined the Supreme Gangsters would also have to add the gangster to their name, and they began to operate much in the same way that the Black Disciple Nation had. So over on the west side of Chicago, around 1967, the Supreme Gangsters were gaining in popularity, and they would begin officially beefing with the Black Disciple Nation around 1968, with this feud reaching boiling point when the founder of the Supreme Gangsters, Larry Hoover, was the target of 68.
Look underneath here, he's got,
and they would begin
he's got not their actual logo, of course.
beefing with the Black Disciple Nation around 1968, with this feud reaching boiling point when the founder of the Supreme Gangsters, Larry Hoover, was the target of numerous assassination attempts. Hoover would survive these attempts, however, and the Supreme Gangsters would continue to expand control throughout the south side of Chicago, encroaching on Barksdale.
I remember watching one of these, bro, and this dude here was sitting there. And if you know who Crip Mac is, right? Crip Mac is a Californian dude. I don't know if you call him a rapper or a YouTuber, probably both. But he's got 55 on his street, on his face, because he's from 55th Street. He's a 55th Street Crip. Right? Rolling 50s. But I remember this one video, bro. He's on here. This dude's on here, and he's got it all written on his face. He's got 5-5 on his face, all this shit on his face. And he calls Crip Mac. And Crip Mac, he FaceTimes Crip Mac, and Crip Mac's like, oh, this nigga. And they're actual good. So this is why I like this dude's videos, bro, because he actually does tap in with these kids, you know what I mean?
At this point, both the Disciples and the P. Stones respected the Supreme Gangsters and wanted to absorb them in order to fight off the other. And apparently Larry Hoover held sit-downs with both David Barksdale and the founder of the P. Stone Nation, Jeff Fort, with the initial result of these talks being a truce between the P. Stones and the gangsters rather than a full merger. However, this alliance ended up falling apart after a May 1969 shooting of 2 Supreme Gangsters by P. Stones. This apparently being a result of 2 members from opposing gangs bumping into each other and not respecting the other.
Hey, that's gonna happen, bro.
And in response to this,
that's gonna happen, bro.
Stones, Larry Hoover met with David Barksdale and agreed a full-blown union. And so, in a landmark deal uniting both gangs,
a landmark deal
in a crew that would now be known as the Black Gangster Disciple Nation, or the BGD. The newly united Black Gangster Disciple Nation continued warring with Chicago's other gangs. This includes an incident where David Barksdale was actually shot whilst in a bar with...
So this is how the Black Gangster Disciples was formed. I'm guessing he's going to end up having, yeah, he's got a lot to cover, because I want to know why they split. You know what I mean? See how far he's gone back? He could have started this off here, bro. He could have started this off here, because this is about the BDs and GDs war. He could have started it off here, but instead, he went back even further, bro. You know what I mean? It's the...
with Larry Hoover, with Hoover acting fast, rushing him to the hospital and saving his life. And in addition to this failed attempt, the P. Stones would have another damning setback in 1972 when their leader Jeff Fort was sentenced to 4 years in jail, where in jail he would actually convert to Islam and drastically change the direction of that organization. However, in the power vacuum left behind, the Black Gangster Disciple Nation were the main target in the crosshairs of the cops, and they would soon slip up. As in 1973, Larry David ordered the murder of William Pookie Young as punishment for stealing drugs and money from one of the crew's dope houses. The shooter who did it and another member of the crew ended up flipping on Hoover, ultimately leading on the feds coming down hard on Hoover in a case which named him as the head of the Supreme Gangsters, leading the judge to duly throw the book at him and sentence him to a hefty 150 to 200 year sentence.
Damn!
However,
America got some crazy sentences, bro. Ain't no one gonna live for 200 years. But I guess they do it just in case, right? It's crazy, bro.
Larry Hoover continued to run the Black Gangster Disciple Nation operations behind the wall in jail, whilst David Barksdale continued to run the teams in the streets. And over time, even going on to try and set up the gang's organization like a strict corporate hierarchy. Something covered extensively in the History Channel's documentary on the GDs, which I very much enjoyed watching for research in this video.
Hoover modeled the GDs like a big corporation.
Should I react to that?
Himself chairman and set up.
Should I react to that? Let me know, bro. Let me know if I should react to that.
On the streets.
Unfortunately, this didn't last for long, because in spite of surviving that earlier attempt on his life, King David had suffered serious injuries, with a bullet effectively having destroyed his kidneys, and he ultimately ended up passing away in September 1974. From here, Jerome Shorty Friedman ended up taking over the Black Gangster Disciple Nation street teams, leaving Larry Hoover to try and keep things united behind bars. But there was a problem, you see, because the love of King David amongst his soldiers in the ranks of the gang ran too strong for Larry Hoover to control. And after King David's death, it seemed like many members stopped respecting Larry Hoover's leadership, and ultimately leading to disrespect of the supreme gangster side of the Black Gangster Disciple Nation alliance. And part of this was because some members were still holding grudges from the time when the two crews were warring in the late 60s before the alliance had been established. And so without unified leadership, many disciples...
Yo, and this is what I was saying the other day on my live stream, bro. When I was talking about why we've been beefing with the Mongol mob. We've been beefing with the Mongol mob for over 50 years. You gotta remember, the Mongol mob and the gang I come from, we were formed long before the Crips and Bloods. All of that, we were formed in the 60s. And we've been beefing since then. And someone was like, yo, why don't you just stop the war? And it's like, yo, it's not as simple as just peace, because for there to be peace, bro, you've got to at least... Peace can only be talked about once the shooting is stopped, bro. And the shooting will only stop once the generations who are active today have died off. So the violence, you got to have generations like my generation and my dad's generation. If the violence stops now, alright, you have to wait for our generations to die off, because so many bodies have been got. There's so many bodies in the past, bro, you know what I mean? So the next generation that comes up, if we can stop the violence now, talking about our generation, and if we can stop the violence now, bro, the next generation that's coming up, they won't have any bodies to hold these grudges. Then they can talk peace, you know what I mean? Actual peace. Kind of shit.
Splinter from the United Crew, and an apparent attempt by Larry Hoover to reunite the nation failed, apparently leading to Don Dirk Acklin bringing back the Black Disciples as one unified gang, and along with Shorty Freeman waging an immediate civil war on the now opposing Gangster Disciples, bringing bloodshed to both the streets of Chicago and the prison wings, where fractured members now waged war. Now, the timeline on specific bits of mythology related to the gangs aren't always that clear, but it seems at this point that each the GDs and the BDs begun to develop their own individual identities going in different directions. And part of
it sounds like a right
branding or imagery that remained consistent with the gangs in the decades that followed as new generations joined and continued to rep the history of the gang. For example, the Black Disciples seem to have a close affinity with the number 3, sometimes being referred to as trays, hence their 3-fingered hand sign known as the gates, a sign which their GD ops would do with 3 fingers down to signify BDK, or that they're a BD killer. The Gangster Disciples have also been known to rep a 360, this apparently standing for 360 degrees, a metaphor for being a pure gangster disciple and having a full circle of knowledge. The GDs are also well known for using a pitchfork in their imagery, hence the 3-pointed pitchfork or rake hand sign that they tend to throw up. A sign which once again the ops flip upside down to represent drop-in rakes, or GDK, which stands for Gangster Disciple Killer. These two pitchforks that appear in the GD logo have a combined total of 6 points, with it being no coincidence that that's also the same number of points that the Star of David that appears in all their logos has. But outside of branding, differences in management style also begun to permeate the two separate groups, with it being said that the Gangster Disciples were structured in a much more corporate hierarchy, with a seniority being based on roles like boards of directors. In contrast, the BDs were structured more like religions, with leaders being given titles like ministers. Anywho, as a still incarcerated
makes sense.
to lose his grip on the streets, he attempted to organize new alliances amongst gangs.
Now it's just wild out there, bro. Now it's just wild.
Of prison-based GDs, BDs, and numerous other Latin gangs under the banner of Folk Nation. But of course, naturally, this would end up backfiring, as the ops of members of those groups, like the Vice Lords and Latin Kings, would also band together forming the People Nation. But from here, as we go into the 80s, things would only get.
Now that's some old gangs he talking about. Damn. Latin Kings, Vice Lords, damn, bro. He talking about dinosaur gangs, homie. Shit.
Worse. After years of shaky attempts to form alliances, in the early 80s the war between the Black Disciples and the Gangster Disciples went to the next level, with BD Street Captain Jerome Shorty Freeman and enforcer Mickey Bull Johnson, freshly released from prison in 1981, taking to the streets to give their foot soldiers an ultimatum. Pick a side, either stick with them as BDs or go and work under Larry Hoover as GDs. This established the BDs as a more unified organization, and over the 80s we saw Hoover as GDs. This established the BDs as a more unified organization, and over the 80s we saw violent battles between GD and BD sets for dominance over the booming Chicago drug trade. Things ramped up to the point where the bloodshed was being reported on by the local news as the local
gangs and terror, a way of life at Cabrini. Damn.
Today the housing authority is $30 million in debt. The building codes are not being enforced, and the elevators, when they work, are called the most dangerous form of public transportation in Chicago. The only structure is provided by...
And the elevators, when they work, called the most dangerous way of transporting Chicago, bro. What the fuck?
By the gang. They marked their turf with spray paint and set up sniper posts in high-rise buildings. Last year, 200 people were shot or stabbed in Cabrini. 8 violent crimes for every 100 people.
How long ago did you get shot? Yeah, sure.
8 violent crimes for every 100 people, bro. That's damn, bro.
Time ago.
And look at when that was, you know what I mean? In the 80s, 90s.
Their business is said to include the sale of teas and blues, a heroin substitute now sold openly on the street in great quantity. The violence has left in its wake people who are afraid. The interaction between the gangs in prison and the gangs on the street is not infrequently seen at the Cabrini Green Housing Project. Since January, it has
1980s,
become a battleground. 36 wounded, 10 killed as of mid-March. And if there's one major gang to be zeroed in on here, it is the Disciples, the largest and the least organized of the re-emerging gangs of the 60s.
The largest and the least organized. And that's what they say today, bro, that the organization within the gangs, the structure just... Like, I think he's going to touch on a point where a lot of gang members went to jail at one point, bro. A lot of them, on both sides. And the structure just fell apart, you know what I mean?
The war reached boiling point in August of 1991 when a BD-led drive-by ended up killing 3 GDs. This led to numerous tit-for-tat shootings in the streets of Chicago, with the city getting so unsafe for the warring gangs that many couldn't even walk the streets safely. And meanwhile in jail, the leadership of the GDs was falling apart. And despite trying to improve his public image by building a public persona more concerned with community work than gangbanging, in the mid-90s Larry Hoover was hit with fresh charges, with prosecutors accusing him of continuing to run the GDs from jail. This bust apparently coming after the court got permission to put a wiretap in a visitor's badge that was given to all of the enforcers who visited the jail to come and talk to Larry Hoover. Meanwhile, the BD senior enforcer, Mickey Bull, ended up getting caught on wiretap ordering the killing of a prison guard. Larry Hoover ultimately got convicted of his crimes and was shipped off to a supermax federal prison in Colorado, far from his native Chicago, making it near impossible for him to operate as head honcho of the gang. This conviction essentially cut off Larry Hoover's communication with 95%.
So this must be the falling apart that I was talking about. Damn.
Trump for the clemency of Larry Hoover, with Trump even signing the First Step Act, which has allowed Larry Hoover to at least start the process of seeking a shorter term. Anywho, with senior figures like David Barksdale or Larry Hoover who had led the visions for these gangs long gone, their dream of a united and focused tribe of hustlers money and protecting themselves from nefarious outside forces diluted. And we would soon see the city of Chicago bringing about the decline of these organizations as they were once known into the more fractured and independent gang set.
That's what I was talking about. Yeah, so here he is touching on that. Damn. That's crazy, bro. You're close to getting, you know what I mean? You think you're going to get out. You got a date. You think you're going to get out one day and then bam, they nail your ass. You know what I mean?
Chicago drill a day. In the 90s, despite still being at war without leaders, the Chicago gangsters had the city's underworld economy on lock. The GDs were still running a highly sophisticated crack cocaine operation, trapping out of numerous projects in Chicago, including some of the buildings in the Robert Taylor Homes estate, Cabrini Green, and Stateway Gardens. The Gangster Disciples operation was rumored to be bringing in $100 million a year, and their presence dominating these projects gave them ample supply of young, impressionable, and impoverished new members to join their ranks, with older GDs turning generations of preteen kids into soldiers and shooters. Meanwhile, the Black Disciples were dominating from a spot that they called the Castle, where the BDs were rumored to have headquartered an operation that could net them up to $300,000 a day, with this large-scale crack and heroin empire apparently coming under the leadership of new BD kingpin Marvel Thompson. Much like the GDs, the BDs were also running that same strategy of grooming young men into joining the gang and doing dirty work early. And it was actually this practice that led to the tragic death of 11-year-old Robert Yummy Sandifer, a troubled youth who had apparently been breaking into houses since the age of 8. Seemingly being too young to ship off to juvie, he ended up in the hand of the Black Disciples. As a perfect candidate for grooming as a young gang soldier, they put a gun in his hand and sent him off to do drillings. Unfortunately, Yummy ended up botching the job, firing into a crowd, hitting 2 rival gangsters, but also killing an innocent 14-year-old bystander named Siobhan Dean. This quickly brought a lot of negative media attention to the gang, who were fearful that 11-year-old Yummy would snitch if caught. So before Yummy would even have the chance, 14 and 16-year-old brothers, Derek and Craig Hardaway, were dispatched to murder him, doing the deed in an underpass, execution style. Ironically, these 2 shooters were caught, convicted, and ultimately brought the BDs a whole lot more media attention than they had been facing to begin with. In the face of such shocking crimes, it's no surprise that by the time we get to the end of the 90s, big BD and GD leaders are being taken off the streets, with high-ranking BD member Robert Allen actually getting flipped in 1998 after admitting to selling over 220 pounds of crack.
Near 64th Street.
Cooperate with the feds, leading to 21 fresh indictments against
Here's what we're talking about. Here we go.
Drug charges, 16 of which he testified against. This put the Black Disciples in disarray. And following the shipping of Larry Hoover out of state in the 90s, by the end of the decade, the leadership of the Gangster Disciples had also been snapped up by the cops in 1999. This included Kingpin Roy Mosley, who was caught with a literal ton of cocaine at a car wash, and William Edwards, an enforcer of Larry Hoover, who had apparently been on the run for 3 years since Hoover's last indictment. By 2001, 4 more Gangster Disciple members were facing
That's crazy, bro. That's crazy.
Indictments for taking part in their drug operation. And throughout the noughties, things did not improve for the warring Chicago gangs. In 2004, another big Fed case was launched against the upper management of the Black Disciples, with King of the Castle, Marvel Thompson, and 41 members being indicted over drug charges. An indictment which even spectacularly accused the gang of laundering money through a rap recording studio that they had set up, with Thompson himself apparently heading up a record label called MOB, a label that is hilariously responsible for producing a little-known rap record called the Cha-Cha Slide. Screw the Twisty Slide. You probably didn't even realize that your Slide. You were BD sliding on the ops Cha-Cha style. Anyway, while the feds were Cha-Cha sliding L for the BD, also in 2005, a massive police sweep swept through the Robert Taylor Homes project, which BDs and GDs had spent years warring over. And by the time the feds had cracked down on these projects, things had gotten so bad that the authorities just decided at this point to demolish it. In fact, this was actually part of a program by Chicago local authorities to dismantle the numerous high-rise projects that had been plagued for the past few decades by gang battles. This left GDs and BDs displaced, fighting over new territory. And from there, the united crews that made up the Gangster Disciples and the Black Disciples begun to fall apart too. Alliances begun to break up, and things shifted to much smaller and less centralized street sets popping up and claiming smaller areas. Some crews whose blocks had been demolished were forced to make new alliances and get money together, but at the same time, throughout the 2000s, the new, younger generation of Chicago gangbangers didn't necessarily respect the alliances of older generations, and new, localized feuds begun to pop off between blocks new and old. And in many ways, the modern-day feuds between the BDs and the GDs are a whole new generation of gang battles between crews that have popped up to claim their local area. And much like the BDs did with their MOB record label, we've seen modern-day Chicago drill rappers and labels emerge from the ranks of these street gangs.
Oh, Chief, shout out Lil Durk.
This time around, they're not just using the music to make money, but also to fuel their beefs, with the 2010 generation of Chicago gangbangers using verses on their songs as an outlet to attack, insult, and goad their ops, dead or alive, into escalating the beef. And so the younger generations of GDs and BDs created new identities for their areas, ushering in a new generation of gangbanging. Younger BD-affiliated sets claimed newer low-rise blocks like Parkway Gardens, initially naming it Wick City with 3 eyes to rep the BDs, and later famously renaming it O Block, this coming after one of their crew, O.D. Perry, was killed. And from here we've gone on to see the likes of Chief Keef and King Von immortalizing O Block forever in both their lyrics and on their silly chains. In the years that have followed the establishment
on these silly chains,
ended up having the most shootings for any block in Chicago. Between June 2011 and June 2014, a total of 19, with it going on to be labeled the most dangerous block in Chicago. This being the result of more modern-day tit-for-tat gang battles between smaller GD and BD sets, this case between the BD area of O Block, feuding with the likes of GD sets, STL, named after their location on 63rd and St. Lawrence. And much like O Block, STL was later infamously renamed Toucaville, again to honour the name of one of their slain members. Other GD sets that claim the area include EBT, named after its location on 64th and Eberhart, with the likes of GD rapper FBG Duck being from these ends and repping the FBG
rest in peace, Duck.
banner. Over the course of the 2010s, as Chicago drill music continued rising to prominence, along with new rappers like Chief Keef and Lil Durk getting
shout out Keef, shout out Durk,
bringing a lot of attention to the street side of what was going on in Chicago, fans would continue to take an interest in the violent clashes between Chicago street gangs related to drill rappers. These tragic and seemingly never-ending scenes on the streets of Chicago were documented extensively by DJ Academics on his War in Chirac channel, and to a lesser extent with a
DJ Academics
music side, Noisy's Welcome to Chirac series.
Don't listen to that fool.
Forever connecting
Don't listen to that fool.
politics of Chicago,
He a goofy dude, bro.
And drill music with it probably.
Like, he a goofy dude, bro. For real, bro. That cat's goofy as hell, bro. DJ Academics, whack, bro.
Being one of the most violent come-ups.
I think he's a real goofball, bro.
Because unfortunately, it took a huge amount of bloodshed for the world to take notice of Chicago's drill music scene. And thankfully, through success in music, many members have been able to escape Chirac with their lives and music careers intact. And some, like FBG Duck, haven't been so lucky. Now look, I won't get any further into the beef between modern-day Chicago drill crews, because if I tried to cover all of the modern-day GD and BD gang battles in one video, it would end up being 10 hours long. So those stories are for another day. But I hope you enjoyed.
We'll react to those too.
Black Disciples and Gangster Disciples got started in Chicago. I hope it's given you a better understanding of how we got here today, and good context for you to understand the origins of the Chicago drill movement. If there's a
shout out to you,
you'd like me to cover as part of this ongoing series documenting gang culture in countries and cities all around the world, drop me a comment and suggest what you want to see. Thank you so much for watching, and peace out.
Yo, shout out to this dude, bro. Hey, yo, so I already watched that, but it was a minute ago, bro. So, yo, that was dope. That was dope. I'm gonna cover some of the other videos that he does too on the same hoods, on the gangs in them hoods, bro. You already know what's up. I'm here in New Zealand, by the way, all the way in New Zealand. So this is enlightening for me. I mess with Vaughn, Duck. I mess with all of them, bro. I just reacted to Coach the Ghost this morning from New York. Go check that out. That was fun. Hey, yo, thanks for tapping in, everyone, bro. You already know what's up. HOODROK Entertainment. It's at the realest, illest, dopest, and most active reaction channel on YouTube. Stay safe, stay dangerous, and we out. Peace.